This is Daddy talking, huh? Okay, we're going to go down there with these 150 cattle. You place that fence, ensure that no one escapes, and then head back up into the hills. You also heard roughly 1/4 of it. Imagine this. In the quiet of an empty arena, a velvet curtain sways, and Reba McEntire sits still behind it. She recently left the spotlight, and this sequined gown is a ghost of it. She was the industry's crown jewel and the Southern darling for years. However, something changes tonight. She removes the smile tonight. She speaks names into the darkness tonight. Additionally, each name bears the burden of a long-hidden wound. Kenny Rogers is the first. He seemed to the world as a silver-haired entertainer, a refined man whose grin could light up a whole arena. Behind the velvet curtain, however, he represented the start of a sour lesson in treachery for Reba. Early on in their joint tours, Kenny frequently brushed off her suggestions, dismissing her creative spark as foolish ambition. He made it plain that she wasn't a partner and referred to her as just another big-haired gal. She served as a warm-up. It didn't end there either. In order to deplete the energy in the crowd, he would subtly switch up the set lists and place his slow ballads immediately after her exuberant performances. They were sophisticated forms of sabotage. They were a golden combo, a force of charm to the audience. However, for Reba, each time she and Kenny Rogers shared the spotlight, it felt like a battle waged with quiet power maneuvers, control, and disdain rather than punches. She also gained her first harsh lesson during that silent conflict. Legends are not all created equal. The duet partner who broke more than just harmonies, Linda Davis, followed. Reba did more than just stand by Linda. She provided her with a platform that she had earned over years of selflessness. However, what had begun as mentoring turned sour. Linda imitated Reba's fashion sense. Even her emotive delivery is a theatrical maneuver. Reba initially interpreted it as flattering, but then she heard rumors from behind the scenes that Linda was making fun of her in private, turning her vulnerability into a joke. When Linda played a near-perfect rendition of one of Reba's classic songs at the same location where Reba had made it famous, it was the last straw. It was eraser, not merely imitation. Something inside of Reba cracked, but she kept her head up. Behind the red carpet grins, sisterhood changed to quiet, trust to sorrow. The scars were deep and silent. Additionally, the name Ronnie Dunn still has a bad aftertaste. Unstoppable, renowned, and brimming with confidence, Brooks and Dunn were the thunderous force at the pinnacle of Nine's Nation. Expecting fireworks on stage rather than explosives behind it, Reba, who is renowned for her power and accuracy, joined them on a co-headlining tour. However, Ronnie Dunn's actions from the first day destroyed the dream. He slouched by stage crews without saying thank you, arrived late to rehearsals, and disregarded all of Reba's coordination efforts. All my life, Alice traveled 650,700 miles from Oklahoma to attend my grand opera debut. He refused to work with her, rolled his eyes when she brought up show structure, and acted as though the limelight was exclusively his. His remarks, which seemed innocuous to others, stung her like razors because they were too refined, too dramatic, and too Reba. She belted her heart out to yelling crowds, signed autographs, and grinned for the cameras. But it was battle on the inside. His haughtiness was more than just annoying, erasing, that is. Note after note, step by step, it eroded the respect she had earned. The illusion hurt the most. Supporters applauded them as teammates, but they failed to notice Ronnie's aloof demeanor, his eye rolls, and his hushed words that irritated her crew. Reba handled everything well. However, the wounds in her soul were not readily healed, because the true performance is the one that no one witnesses when you are supposed to duet with someone who is subtly trying to dim your light. However, Travis Tritt's scar is one of the deepest. Reba originally thought Travis had a lot of potential. An unadulterated, gritty talent with the potential to upend the country music industry. She initially thought they were like-minded individuals who were fearless, unvarnished, and brutally genuine. She therefore believed it would be electrifying when the chance to perform together on a broadcast award presentation presented itself. Behind the scenes, however, there was far from peace. Travis exuded confidence as he entered the rehearsal room. In creative meetings, he would interrupt her in the middle of her sentence, roll his eyes at her proposals, and act as though the stage was all his. The producers and crew both noticed, but no one dared to question him. Travis refused to compromise when Reba finally raised her concerns regarding the tempo and choreography. He made no effort to listen. Then, "Don't do it," he snapped, treating her like a throwaway object. That moment was more painful than any critical assessment. It was more than just creative vision. Respect was at issue. For Reba, both in public and privately, that line had been crossed. Anger simmered just beneath the rhinestones as she gave the performance of her life on the stage. Her teeth clenched and her grin plastered. Reba drew a strong line after that night. He would never again be on the same stage as her. She refused to bow to the ego of others, not because she was incapable of handling conflict. A bruise like that is difficult to get rid of. It becomes ingrained in memory, legacy, and all subsequent decisions. It was an unexpected source of the next punch. Keith Toby. He was loud, brazen, and unrepentant. At first, Reba respected that. His presence evoked memories of the early days of country music when grit was more important than gloss, since it was genuine and unvarnished. But the night he made her the target of his vicious jokes, that respect broke. At a high-profile industry event attended by executives and the media, Toby didn't merely crack a joke. He turned Reba's political principles into a spectacle by launching into a derisive diatribe. Reba did not laugh, but the room did. There was a tempest of embarrassment behind her composed grin. Her heart thumping with betrayal, she stood there clapping courteously. He published a song a few days later that immediately resonated with her admirers. A thinly veiled, sarcastic assault on her principles. It was more than satire. It was intimate. The words, tone, and timing are all too pointed to be coincidental. Long accustomed to being criticized by strangers, Reba was devastated by a blow from someone who ought to have known better. He laughed it off when she discreetly challenged him. "Just showbiz," he added, as though the act included her suffering. Everything changed in that instant. She could handle bold, not because he was brazen, but because he was unrepentantly and purposefully cruel. Reba left that chapter feeling chilly but not resentful. Gar Brooks left a quieter, but no less severe, wound, with a better knowledge of who really supported her and who would prefer to be laughed at than to be loyal. They were more than simply co-workers. They served as cornerstones in a world that was changing quickly and were symbols of the same upheaval. For years, Reba had supported G, cheered his victories, defended his fashion changes, and even protected him from rumors that his celebrity came at the expense of tradition. She had faith in him. She thought their loyalty was the same. Therefore, it wasn't merely a business suggestion when she asked him to perform on her eagerly anticipated comeback album, Heart on Her Sleeve. It was a plea with roots in friendship, history, and shared heritage. G, however, refused, just a courteous pass with no explanation or remorse. The true betrayal was unexpected by Reba. A few days later, he and a young, up-and-coming artist produced a song that was almost exactly the same. A video full of stillness and chemistry, a duet that went viral. G never admitted it or gave an explanation. It was more than a simple rejection. Eraser was the object. The sting wasn't merely professional for Reba. It was intimate. His response to her vulnerable grasp was one of indifference. That stillness was more powerful than any chorus and more incisive than any lyrics. Unaware of what she had requested or how it had broken something inside of her, the crowd cheered his latest smash. Because even after the acclaim subsides, the anguish of being forgotten by the person you stood next to remains. And lastly, Vince Gill, the one who personally injured me. He was more than just a fellow entertainer. At one point, Reba thought of him as a close friend. They had had silent talks before curtain calls, late-night giggles in tour buses, and an apparently unbreakable regard for one another. But when Reba's life started to fall apart, everything changed. Vince disappeared during one of the hardest periods of her life when she lost her father and the media started to take advantage of the disarray. He didn't show up when she needed a friend to just be there without singing when her heart was aching. No reassuring phone call, no private visit, no shoulder to shoulder, simply a generic card in the mail, like a stranger's formality. And Vince remained far away, refusing to be seen with her in public as the media tarried her name through the mud, unwilling to jeopardize his impeccable reputation by standing next to someone who was going through a difficult time. For Reba, friendship is defined by being there in the quiet rather than by receiving praise. Vince wasn't there when it mattered the most, and that absence reverberated more sharply than any betrayal and louder than any insult. Because it doesn't only shatter your heart when someone who used to be by your side decides to disappear when you're at your weakest. It permanently alters your ability to trust. These were more than minor quarrels. Reba's career was shattered like earthquakes by these profound emotional fault lines. Erratic, startling, and persistent. Fans couldn't see the bruises left by each battle, but they were pulsing beneath every note she sang. She didn't strike out at each betrayal. She gained knowledge, adjusted, and gracefully fortified herself. She never forgot, though, and the agony began to grow in her silence. Not all people consider Reba McEntire to be a country legend. She is the culmination of all the phases she overcame while she was broken. She took each award with trepidation. In front of cameras that never witnessed her tears, every grin she made was like armor. She was shaped by the industry to be quiet, gentle, and diminutive. Reba, however, declined. Every betrayal, backhanded compliment, and cold shoulder became thunder in her voice and fire behind her eyes. She wasn't seeking retribution when she eventually called these names out loud. She did it for freedom, truth, and the inner child who used to keep quiet to maintain harmony. Today, she reclaims that stillness with a dignified battle cry rather than with resentment. Country queens rise because they don't fall, they persevere. And with scars that shine more brilliantly than jewels, they stand taller than before the dust falls.